You're now listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast, the ultimate insider's guide for all things ocean shipping. Presented by NYSHAX.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. I'm your co-host, Caroline Weaver, and with me is Lars Jensen.
Hello.
And we also have special VIP guest, Don Davis. Don is the SVP of Commercial at Zim. Don, how are you doing today?
Well, that's you've been a minute-by-minute question the past couple of days, but right now seems pretty okay.
Good. We wanted to have you on the podcast to provide a little bit of a carrier perspective on what's going on with all the craziness right now. With Lars's perspective, he's more agnostic. He's not, particularly affiliated with anyone, but Don, we thought it'd be good to hear from someone that's, in the weeds at the carriers. What are they thinking about? What are they talking about? So maybe just kick us off with what's top of mind for you right now.
Well, I think what's top of mind is just getting our arms around what's going on with these tariffs, particularly with China. We saw a reprieve with the reciprocal tariffs to everywhere else but China because China retaliated. And it has a pretty significant impact on us on both import and export basis. So we're trying to figure out, now at this point, how long is this going to last? Because it's just unclear, and things have been changing day by day. And I've frankly never seen anything like this in my career in the industry, which is about 30 years now, which doesn't seem possible. But anyway, it's been very volatile. And I think, Lars, I was wondering, what's your perspective on this too? Because maybe I missed something, but I don't remember a time in this industry with so much volatility on shipping, just so many things impacting it from one day to the next.
Yeah, I would tend to see it exactly the same way. I've been here 24 years, and I struggle to find anything even comparable. And even when I look at historical records, nothing even close to it. We always have uncertainty. There's always, will there be a recession, or will there be a port strike, or will somebody go bankrupt? These are normal questions. We've even been through the pandemic. We've been through the start of the Red Sea crisis. Nothing compares to now. And I think the most fundamental aspect here is the nature of the unpredictability. The nature here is regulatory from one of the largest governments in the world, so you have to abide by it. And second, on top of that, is the speed with which this changes. One thing is introducing, just sake of argument, 145% tariffs. But there's a difference between doing that basically on a day-to-day basis or telling the market, by the way, 2 months from now, it's going to be 145%, and then we're going to stay at that level for 6 months. That would be manageable, but doing it day by day, that's the real killer.
Yeah. And I think that, the Trump administration gives these little signals that, something is coming, but it's anybody's guess what that means. And, us as a carrier operator, and I think for any of the carriers out there, ships are these massive, expensive assets. And you can't just say, okay, we're going to stop calling this port. We're going to reconfigure our network, because that may be very short-lived. So it's very difficult for us. And I think that you see just a lot of carriers blanking as a result.
You might have 20, 30 years experience in the industry, but I've got, a very long 6 years in the industry. And in just my time, I've seen so much volatility. It was basically just before COVID when I started. And throughout the years, you've seen all sorts of seemingly unprecedented things, but I'm just beginning to think this is what it is.
I think it's a reasonable thought. I always feel for people that are new to the industry, is it always like this? I'm like, it really wasn't, but maybe this is the new normal.
It might be.
This is where we should contemplate what comes next that makes it even more volatile.
Okay, well, let's get into it, Lars. What do you think?
Let's get through this one first. This is going to be difficult for quite a while to come. So
what do we think are the next steps that are going to be taken, in the coming months, let's say?
The way I see it is, it's a question we can't answer with one answer. It depends on where you're shipping from to start with. Just look over the past week. If you are shipping from China, you are doing one thing right now because you are faced with absolutely punitive tariffs. It depends on who we are talking to. Because if you're shipping from China right now, you're doing one thing. You are trying to curb as many shipments as possible in the hope that the 145% will go away. And there's a reasonable chance that might happen. If you're shipping from every other country in the world, you are fast tracking movements because all of a sudden the reciprocal tariffs are gone for the next 90 days. So some right now is the pedal to the metal in terms of moving cargo. For others, it's stand back and do nothing. And this literally changes on a day by day basis. So what should a shipper do? Well, it very much depends. Where are you shipping from and to?
You know, over the weekend, I got an email from a company that I've bought from before. They do luggage and things like that. They sent an email saying, we have no idea what's going on with the prices either. You might see some changes. Things are going to get more expensive, most likely. We're figuring it out. We don't have any idea really right now either. They're like, you might want to buy something now if you've been eyeing it because chances are it's going to get more expensive. So I thought that was kind of an interesting approach to be so forthright about it with your customers.
Well, I think that's one of the effects that everyone's wondering about. Like, is this going to cause a surge in demand because people are anticipating prices are going to get more expensive? I know there's a lot of media articles trying to tell people, this is what's going to get expensive. And I don't know how accurate those things are. I really don't look at them. But it'll be interesting to see because I think from a carrier perspective and what some of the things we've heard is that some shippers are trying to push out cargo now ahead of tariffs because of the volatility. Nobody knows how long this is going to last. And if you have a reprieve, well, at least you can ship under the current tariffs. But what happens in 90 days? What kind of deal are they negotiate? Are they going to be less? Well, that doesn't really feel likely. So I think you're starting to see that. But what's the exact effect? Is it going to be like COVID where we saw a material shift to goods? Probably not. But how much is that effect going to take place? That's something we're trying to find out.
Yeah, and you can add some of the interesting challenges. Or remember, everybody, we got one ripple after another during COVID. And if we try to think just one or two steps ahead, right now, sure, huge downfall in bookings out of China for obvious reasons, but also a surge in bookings from, for example, Southeast Asia. And the focus right now seems to be on the vessels, but that's not the whole story. What about the empty containers? I mean, we've just been through the slack season. The carriers have pre-positioned empties. Guess where? Into China in preparation for peak season. Sure, also into Southeast Asia, but that was again in preparation for a normal season. So I can easily envisage a situation also where we end up, the world will have plenty of empty containers. Asia will have enough Asia containers, but they might be in the wrong physical places. So you could very easily have a situation where, on one hand, you have overcapacity, you don't have full ships, yet freight rates might be skyrocketing because the equipment is lacking.
Well, and that's an interesting effect when you think about it, because let's say that happens, and let's say this China tariff exists for a while, we're going to have to move some of our empties to other places. But then let's say that, after we start doing that, there's a reprieve on the tariffs to China. Well, then we're stuck. Now we don't have containers in that place. So, just giving people some perspective on a carrier, it's very hard for us because it's just not so simple. These ships are massive. They were expensive to operate. We got containers all over the place, and we can get through it for some time. But again, when it's these kind of volatile swings, it just makes it very hard to manage your business.
And one thing to maybe also take, and we talk a lot about, for example, 145% tariffs on China. Let's not forget the other direction, with the U.S. exporters now facing 125% tariffs for the cargo they want to sell into China. They're going to be stuck with even longer ripple effects because the blank sailings we are seeing now, they will turn into blank sailings for the U.S. exporters a month from now. So even if the situation with China then gets fixed, say within the next week, we could be hopeful, the exporters are still going to face a capacity crunch. They're still going to feel the effect of the blank sailings, even when the problem is gone. Again, it's these ripples we also saw during COVID, that they happen with time delays measured in months.
The impact on the exporters is kind of interesting because we often focus on importers and how the tariffs are going to impact them. But when you think about exporters, it's not just like the service, but it's also like their buyers. It might not be quite so easy to find other buyers in other countries that are willing to pick up the slack of, the lack of demand that might be coming in the coming months.
No, and you can say, if you look at, let's take a specific group, the U.S. farmers, they are a major export group. Not only are they faced with this uncertainty, they are right now just growing their crop. So they are worried about crop that they are harvesting 4, 5, 6 months from now where they need to ship it. Right now, they haven't got the slightest clue whether they're going to be able to sell it or not. And if they're not going to be able to sell it to China, who can they then sell it to? This is an extremely difficult situation.
Yeah, I think some of the things we've heard from exporters is just, that they can't, like a lot of the things we export isn't going to be able to be shipped with the current tariff. So they look for alternative buyers. Can they, and they might sell more domestically. I think I've heard a number of shippers say, we're just looking for U.S. export or U.S. markets where we could sell it. And they might have to do that at a discount, but again, it's going to make sense when you compare how much they're going to have to pay in a tariff to ship it to China.
Yeah, if you're American, you might want to go support your local farmers, buy local, farm to table.
You see, just to add, so far we talked about the direct, especially U.S. import-export, but this is going to affect all the other trades as well. If you look at, again, China as an example. Okay, there's a lot of Chinese manufacturers. Now they can't sell a lot of stuff to the U.S. They're going to dump prices on a lot of manufactured stuff to all other countries around the world. So this is also going to shift trade patterns and volumes in trades that are not directly impacted by U.S. tariffs at all.
100% right. I mean, and we've heard some of I think the thing is like some of these, we're shipping a lot of raw materials. So like, you don't need to worry about if you're shipping logs, you don't have to like necessarily dress it up. There might be certain customs requirements you have, but it's a lot easier to shift these volumes around for the exporters, just because, as I said, it's a lot of raw materials. And we've heard, this is exactly what exporters are looking at. I don't think it's that different than shippers. It's shippers looking at alternative sourcing, and I heard a lot of acceleration on plans to look at, can I buy this and ship it from somewhere else? But exporters are in a similar situation, like who can I sell this to? And again, we're waiting to see the whole fallout here. And a lot of it's going to depend on how long this lasts. But it stands to reason that there's going to be some winners and losers here. And for us, we just have to kind of wait for this to evolve a little bit before we can make material changes. Because again, as I said, it's very hard to reconfigure your network to accommodate these things.
Yeah, and maybe picking up on that, when you say winners and losers, it might be a good point to compare to what we saw during the height of all the pandemic disruptions. If we look over on the shipper side, the extremely high prices and the challenges, at least from a high level perspective, tended to benefit large shippers and be a disadvantage for quite a few of the small shippers out there. Whereas on the other hand, on the carrier side, at that point in time, there was a huge added business model for a lot of the small new niche carriers that came into the market during that period. If we look at the situation right now, that might be somewhat different. Because if you're a very small importer, you might be more nimble in terms of shifting a material part of your sourcing. That might not really be the case if you are a huge importer. That's a lot more difficult. Whereas over on the carrier side, again, if we focus on, say, the Transpac into US West Coast, the large alliance carriers have the opportunity to blank sailings and shift cargo around the network. If you are a small niche carrier, you have one service. And basically all of the niche services service China to the US. They are going to be extremely heavily impacted by the current environment.
And we haven't even talked in this episode about USTR. Is there any updates that we should touch on here, or maybe some of the implications of it with the current events?
I mean, from a carrier side, we're watching with interest. For those that maybe don't know, there was some executive order, I think it was called Make Shipbuilding Great Again. And contained in that executive order was a recommendation to implement the recommendations from the USTR, but it didn't say what it was. So we're wondering what that's going to look like. It sounds like it's going to happen, that there's going to be some sort of penalty assessed to carriers for operating Chinese vessels. Unclear what that's going to be, but something certainly we're trying to keep our eye on, because as it was proposed, that would have a material impact on the vessels we call. But again, I'm not sure that's exactly how it's going to shake out, but what it looks like, again, it's just part of all this uncertainty we're facing right now.
You can say my take on it is also, it was kicked out for a rebreather here, and nothing material was suggested in this executive order apart from a timeline. So the US Trade Representative had to come up with a tangible proposal within 120 days. Whether that then leads to a new executive order at that time or a legislative process is completely unknown. if I was to offer at least a glimmer of hope, they didn't just adopt the proposal as it was. So at least there is some pause for rethinking. That's not a guarantee that it's going to be changed. It is now also lumped in with a massive increase of what's called the harbor maintenance tax. So presumably, if you're shipping US cargo in through Canada or Mexico, you're going to be slapped with a major fine for doing that. There are going to be fees for buying and it seems to me also using Chinese produced terminal handling equipment.
Like cranes?
Yes.
Well, I think the point is that there's just a lot of, I mean, from where I am, there's a lot of cost headwinds for us as a carrier. Shippers are facing a lot of cost headwinds from these tariffs. Interesting that a company like Amazon, I don't know if anybody read this, but they're trying to shift the responsibility onto the shipper side. So they're trying to change their terms in order to avoid being exposed to these tariffs. Again, I imagine a lot of the big importers can try and do that. I don't know how successful they'll be, but certainly you can see there's all these things happening right now, which I think is going to take some time for us to see how it's all going to shake out. But I think in the short term, like I said, we're just watching our utilizations, talking to our shippers, and trying to understand, what should we do with these ships? Should we blank, omit? Not sure yet.
Yeah, and you can say almost coming full circle to also where we started. I would venture the view it's not the magnitude of the tariffs that's the biggest problem. It's a problem for some, absolutely. But the biggest problem is the speed of the changes, because that makes it completely impossible for shippers and for forwarders and carriers, ports and terminals and drayage providers to have any kind of hope of doing any midterm planning or even long-term planning. Most of this is firefighting as it is right now. Most shippers just say, fine, let's stick with our current supply chain and then do firefighting, because how can you make a long-term plan when you don't know anything about what the future looks like? And follow up to that one is also, I don't believe anybody is going to invest anything right now, neither in new supply chains nor in, for example, new manufacturing units, be that in the US or be that in Southeast Asia or Latin America or anywhere else. Because how can you make a business decision to say invest $500 million in a new manufacturing plant, not knowing what the tariff situation will look like a day, a week, or a month from now? Such decisions surely are being looked at in many countries. I have no, in many companies. I have no doubt about that. But pulling the trigger on those ones will not happen until there is a known stable environment, no matter what that environment is.
Yeah. Have you seen that at Zimdon, where you might be kind of postponing some of those other conversations while you get through this tumultuous period?
100%. I mean, 100%. We're in contract season. We hear from a number of companies that they're delaying or reviewing their awards because, again, all their forecasts are going to change now. So, I think it's that point that Lars made that people, we talk a lot about we're in a wait and see period. And I would say that's not fully accurate because it sounds like you're sitting around doing nothing, just waiting for something to happen. I think everyone's kind of looking at what they're doing today and trying to see like what can I move, what scenario A, B, and C for me, and then waiting to see how this all plays out before they can execute one plan. So I think it's a lot more planning, but the actual execution, again, no one wants to be on the wrong side of this. You can make a decision. I'm going to move all my sourcing out of China to Vietnam, and then China gets like there's a breakthrough, and now we're friends with China, and then it's like, oh, that was a terrible decision. That cost me millions of dollars. That slowed me down. So no one's going to want to make those decisions. It's more like, okay, we're going to observe. We expect this to change quickly. Sounds like things in China could cool off soon-ish, but again, it's just pure speculation. Nobody knows.
Have you been seeing the front loading out of China, in the last couple of weeks?
I think that was already happening. I mean, I think in the early part of the year, and then shortly after the Lunar New Year, there was some front loading. I mean, we heard that from customers. And I think there's some companies who are like, hey, listen, we're full of inventory. We don't really have to ship. We can kind of wait this out and see what happens. So it just depends on where you are with your supply chain. If you're already front loading, that's there. If you weren't, I think when it reopens, then you're going to see this big surge. But again, it's hard to tell who's in that bucket and who isn't. We're only going to know better once it gets turned back on. And then, I'm sure our customers will be reaching out to us for forecasts and telling us, what can you do?
And maybe if I can just chip in with a comment on what you mentioned before, Don, in terms of basically wait and see, not necessarily being a bad thing. We should all keep in mind when we talk, for example, major strategic decisions, a good decision at times is also to recognize this is a good time not to make a decision. That is a perfectly valid decision in and of itself.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That is a decision that I'm sure a lot of people are making right now. Gotta wait and see, basically.
To that point, there's so many questions. I get to ask the same question so many times, like what's happening, what's going on, and because we want to know and we want to plan, and the reality is like we don't know. And as we talked about at the top, there's just so much volatility, more than we've seen historically. It's just a very challenging situation. It's logical things will get sort of sorted out here in the next couple of weeks, but again, it's very difficult as every day goes by. The longer this is out there, it's going to be challenging.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what's going to go on, but we know these ripples. Once something has started, it will go through. We talked about the equipment before. We also had an element of rapid stop and go in bookings just before the reciprocal tariffs, just after. And as we all know, the supply chain, and here I'm thinking especially ports and terminals, are geared for a relatively stable flow. Stop and go is absolutely poison for efficient terminal operations. That's also what caused major problems during the pandemic phase. And we haven't seen this stop and go hit the US ports just yet.
When would we expect to see that?
Well, that should basically be within the next 1 to 2 weeks on the West Coast, 2 or 3 weeks on the East Coast.
All right. We'll have to keep our eyes peeled for changes in the operational turn time at different ports to see the impact there. Were there any other topics that you all wanted to get into today that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
I would like to bring one up that we haven't talked about. It's one of those topics I think would have been front and center in the entire industry. The results of the MEPC meeting at IMO just last week. On Friday, for those that may be unfamiliar with the acronym SOUP here, IMO is the International Maritime Organization, and the MEPC is basically the group that meets twice a year to hopefully agree and decide on environmental rules and regulations. The whole purpose of the meeting last week was to try to come up with some binding agreements to make sure decarbonization on shipping stays on track, where IMO is targeting basically decarbonization by 2050. I haven't analyzed everything in detail, let me be honest on that one, but what I've seen so far is an agreement that has some elements linked to payments on the use of fossil fuels. You can always debate whether it's the right formula or not. What I take away from this is that people that were very much wanting decarbonization to go as rapidly as possible are not satisfied because they don't think this is enough. People that said this is moving far too fast are also dissatisfied because they think this is too much, which kind of to me signs at least you landed with a compromise somewhere in the middle. Whether that compromise is then enough to actually stay on track for decarbonization is a different question. But the very fact that this is not hitting any of the major shipping outlets, is not a major discussion topic, also shows how much everybody is swamped in the day-to-day firefighting, that this is not really getting any airtime.
How often do they meet to discuss the trajectory of these new legislations?
They meet twice a year, but the agendas tend to be slightly different. What we basically knew was they were discussing methodologies in the two meetings last year. They were supposed to meet here last week to come up with recommendations for something binding. They actually did that. And the next step is for the meeting in, it must be October, to actually then put it to a vote and make sure this then goes into effect as something binding, most likely from 2027.
Gotcha. And Don, from the Zim side, have you all been talking about this, or has this just been completely overshadowed
No,
since the timeline
mean
is a
it
bit
is.
slower?
I mean, it just happened. I mean, certainly, the environmental issues are one that we're aware of. It's important to us. If you look at our company, we're out getting these LNG ships, which we know LNG is not necessarily the answer. One could argue it's the best answer that's available today. So, I mean, it's something that we're trying to do. But again, it's something that we also know that If you look at our strategy, our ships, we charter a lot of our fleet, and we do that. So a lot of these LNG ships are on long-term charters. They're 10-year cycles because we know LNG is not the tech that's going to get us to where we need to be. So it stands to reason that in 10 years we'll have a better idea of like what types of options are available. But certainly, we're paying attention to this because, it's a regulatory issue, and we want to be compliant. It's just what options are available for us as a carrier. That's the very expensive question, because we know ships last for, 20, 25 years. So if you have an order book and you're ordering ships, are they going to be able to be compliant with the new regulations? This is always the question. So certainly it's something that we pay attention to. And in the short term, we're going to try and do what we can to be as keep our emissions as low as possible. But long term, still a lot of questions in my mind.
Yeah. It's an interesting approach to do a lease on these vessels because it makes a lot of sense. You don't know what the direction that the policy is going to go. I think it might be worthwhile kind of explaining the difference between LNG and the traditional fuel that vessels use.
I mean, there's three that are primarily used. There's heavy fuel, low sulfur fuel, and LNG. And you might have heard this word scrubbers used before. And if you're burning heavy fuel, you need a scrubber to keep the emissions low enough in order that you're not creating the same level of pollution that you might have just burning heavy fuel. Or you could buy low sulfur fuel. So I think in 2020 is when this whole requirement came out to keep your emissions to a certain point, and many carriers went to low sulfur fuel. Now LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, is basically another option. It's a cleanest option available. And you see many carriers have started to go in that direction. Some carriers have tried to use in things like methanol. What I know about methanol is it's a cleaner version than LNG. There's just not enough or methanol to burn and operate power the industry. So there's a lot of challenges out there, and there's a lot of innovation happening in this space. Many ships have dual tanks, and their engines can burn different kinds of fuel. But some ships are equipped to handle different types of fuel, and some ships are LNG, and they can also burn low sulfur fuel, and they kind of switch between the two. We actually burn LNG, but anyway, there's some different options out there for carriers, and some carriers have been experimenting with different things. But again, still a very unclear picture of like what is going to be the best option for the industry.
And maybe just to add one comment in as well, we tend on this always to talk a lot about the carriers and what are fuel options, what can they do. But we should also at times talk about what are the shippers actually doing out there. And sure, there certainly are some shippers out there that are willing to pay for greener fuels. Several carriers have the option for example, voluntarily buying biofuel add-ons if you want to decarbonize part of your supply chain. But the fact of the matter is also that the amount of shippers that are genuinely actually willing to pay for this is a very, very tiny proportion of the shippers out there. So one thing is, of course, pointing at the carriers saying, well, you're not investing enough. Well, shippers not really wanting to pay for it either. So this is also a challenge.
Yeah, it seems to go in and out of style a bit depending on the state of the market in general.
And then I get back to why I flagged it here, because right now it's completely out of style, because with everything else in terms of tariffs being completely on fire, nobody cares about the green agenda right now.
But I think the interesting thing from that perspective, Lars, is just another thing that's a cost headwind for the carriers. We just finalized this ILA agreement, but these costs are hitting our books. So now we have an increased cost that we're paying to the union. So all of our terminal costs just went up. Then you say, okay, now you have these USTR implication, also some cost headwind. You talk about the environmental cost headwind. And I know everyone's like crying us a river because carriers have had pretty decent results lately. But at the end of the day, like we want to continue in the future to have good results. And it just becomes very difficult when you have all this uncertainty and cost headwind in front of you.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're talking a lot about the costs that shippers are going to be facing, but it's not just only them. You're going to see it for carriers, for other members of the industry. All right, y'all. I think that was an awesome episode. We should probably wrap it up here, but we'll be back next week. Lars, before we sign off, where are you calling in from this week?
Well, Right now, as you can see, it's a bit rainy outside. I'm into the mountains in Armenia, out in the countryside, by some 1500-year-old monasteries. A week from now, when I'm calling in, it might be hopefully better weather. I'll be calling in from Iraq at that point in time.
It's hard to keep up with you. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll be back next week, Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Until then, hope everything goes well for you this week. Hopefully it's not too chaotic, but I can't make any promises. Talk to you then.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Supply Chain Secrets Podcast, presented by Nice Shacks. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Want to be a part of the show? Register to attend a live recording at the link below.